Summer afternoon was beginning to set in. Despite the surrounding trees, heat still permeated the unkept road in the city outskirts. Behind the wheel of a raggedy truck, a man wiped his brow and began to wonder if this job was worth it. Sure, it paid well. Very well, but going out into the forest alone was tricky work at the best of times. The peak of summer was worst of all, what with so many fayish councils going on. But Keith tightened his belt and accepted the task, picking up a cake from a bakery. His kids were so excited he was going to a semi-famous bakery. Mind you, he had never personally heard it before, and they pestered him to bring them back sweets. "Lemon," one asked. "No, chocolate." "I want cherry," said the second and third. Keith's nephew, who had worked as a mechanic for a year now, had to pry them off their father's leg so he could leave and actually do the delivery. But the longer he followed the vague road signs directing him, the more second thoughts he had. His truck sputtered and spouted mechanical obscenity, which worried him greatly, but this was not a job he could turn back on now. Aside from the lack in payment, his employer would be particularly upset if he was to come back empty-handed. At last there was a break in the tree-filled countryside, a place for him to park with signage. Shutting off his truck, he put his cap and duster on and was about to leave the vehicle when he spotted several sets of bulging eyes in the stalks. "Oh no, you don't." Grumbling, Keith retrieved several trinkets from a compartment. Stepping out, he shouted to the brush while applying some oil under his jaw. "Stay away from my ride, you hear? I need no bother today. No dealin' or stealin' or unauthorized wheelin' with me or my property." He knew the oil would deter any of the fairy folk from approaching him unallowed, but he wanted to hear verbal confirmation that they would leave his things alone. When all he got was a chorus of stifled giggles, he guffawed. "Dressed good-for-nothing neighbors." Loosening a string on a pouch, he retrieved a few pinches of chalky pink powder, proceeding to lightly powder his truck. At this, the pixies hissed and wove about the fields in search of other fun. "And stay away," Keith called out, feeling rather smug about the whole thing. Now, if only the weather cooled off a tad more, things would be pleasant. Keith strolled to where dirt road became dirt path. Stooping down, he read the sign. Three Sisters Bakery. Path only accessible by foot, pony, or large toad. Toads. Hope they don't serve troglodytes. At least not while I'm there. Throwing on another dash of oil, he braved the path leading to this supposedly famous bakery. He wondered, weaving between low-hanging boughs, how they became so famous, or what they were doing hiding away so far from the city. Ever thicker trees trailed into view. Mist swirled around their trunks, while Keith kept muttering old poems meant to keep the boggarts at bay. Oh, how he despised boggarts. Always stealing his tire irons and crowbars. Always the crowbars. Decrepit signs were staked into the ground at uneven intervals. Only 2 of them ever mentioned the bakery. All the others were faded warnings. Curses, death, the usual. Probably to keep away solicitors. A slight chill of unease crept up Keith's spine when the path suddenly became flanked by murky waters. The surrounding trees, once proud and luscious, now drooped like cranky old widows ready to sling foul misgivings. And the humidity! It was stifling in his automobile on the way over, but this incessant cloaking warmth was something else entirely. How could anyone stand working in a place like this? Keith drew out all the thoughts about abandoning the job. He certainly needed the money and repute. More importantly, his family needed it. Not long after the signs stopped, the path split into 3 prongs. Keith leaned this way and that, attempting to see anything farther up, but to no avail. In the end, he went straight. After all, who'd set up a business in a non-obvious direction? No sooner than 10 steps did a figure come barreling out of the gunky waters. It was massive. Taller than a man, dredged head to toe in decaying swamp matter. Keith yelled, screaming the first half of a poem line in a vain attempt to ward off the thing. But it didn't work, and he was promptly caught by the wrists and dragged off into the right path. Keith kicked and screamed the whole way, saying many old wardings to see exactly what this creature was, but none of them worked. Attempting to peer into his captive's inner workings was futile as well. All he saw past the boggish drapings were congealed mud and black dots. A few minutes later, he was set down gently on a patch of bright green grass. He was about to leap away to run, but stopped, noticing the building in front of him. Almost as if it were cut out on purpose, a solitary island of pristine green lawn lay beneath a perfectly circular hole in the bog canopy. A brightly colored pink house with several extensions rested peacefully on the farthest side, smoke rising from 3 stone-cut chimneys. Windows were lined with fanciful trimmings, elegantly made curtains, and a sign over the door read in bulbous font, "Three Sisters Bakery. Let's settle that sweet tooth." Not a moment after Keith collected himself did the front door open, revealing the most hideous woman he had ever seen. Her face was covered in warts, her hair thin in parts and long and clumpy in others. Long, wiry fingers frayed out from under a cloak, and over that was a frilly pink apron with a name tag. "Oh, welcome to the bakery." She hobbled with surprising quickness, shaking Keith's hand with equally youthful vigor. Now that she was closer, her name tag clearly said Loretta in tiny, scraggly print. "Seems you might have gotten lost on the way over. I see we need to put out better signage if Stefan had to help you find your way." Keith struggled to find his voice. "Stefan? You mean this monster?" Exaggerated shock drew the lady's face taut. "Monster? Heavens no! Stefan wouldn't hurt a fly. In fact, he's more apt to attract them." Stefan sat down on the grass with his legs splayed out and twiddled them around. "Knew we shouldn't have made him out of cookie dough." "It was gonna go bad anyway," came a scraggly voice from the bakery, followed by the sound of pans clattering, followed by the ground rumbling and green fire shooting out of the chimneys. Loretta hit herself in the head a few times. "Stay out of my conversations, Greta. This is my customer." She smiled at Keith, revealing a whopping 3.5 teeth. "You know how it is, having 2 sisters bound by ancient rituals able to circumvent your privacy hexes to share the same body and mind." Keith felt a lump gather in his throat. Your hags." Loretta waved him off. "Oh, pshaw! You've nothing to worry about, young man. We've left behind that life of wickedry for a more passionate business. There's not much for cursing infants or stealing young women's beauty or claiming body parts in exchange for immeasurable power anymore. But there's lots to be had with muffins." "Muffins." "So good you'll want to pay with your eyes." Loretta wheezes with laughter while making quick glances at Keith's eyes, as if he just might exchange them for a muffin. "Are we ordering or picking up?" For a moment, Keith didn't know if she was talking to him or not. Yeah, picking up. Sorry, for Mr. Orvietti." "Ah, the lovely wedding cake!" Loretta's eyes lit up, literally, with cold green flames. "We've been slaving away for that young mistress. Oh, if I was a young 400-year-old hag again, I'd travel to her myself and wring my nails around her fritzy little neck." She ushered Keith toward the bakery. Come in, we should be nearly done with it." Keith fought back every part of his body, screaming at him to shrink away from the gnarled hand, but resisted. "It's okay, Keith," he told himself. "Do it for them." No one would think the bakery would be home to a sisterhood of hags at first glance. Everything on the inside matched the same aesthetic energy as the exterior. Bright pink, colorful trimmings, display cases filled with pristine cakes, cookies, cupcakes, scones, and every other thing a regular bakery would sell. There were even shelves along the wall closest to the door, with ingredient bundles to take home and make goods yourself. Loretta took one look at the front counter. "Greta!" she screamed. Her voice rattled the whole building. "Get to the front counter!" There was clanking in the back. The kitchen door burst open, and from it emerged a woman even more horrendous than Loretta. Greta hardly had any hair on her head, which didn't help to hide her pox-creased skin. Her shoulders and neck were curved like a shepherd's cane. At least her fingers looked relatively normal, if not a bit long on the fingernails. "Patience, sister. And who said you could be the boss of us?" "I'm the oldest," Loretta fumed. "And the ugliest," Greta retaliated.
Besides, the order's not ready yet. What? It's not ready,
Greta shouted louder.
I heard you the first time you strung a gopher. Why isn't it done yet? Oh, well, you see, Brenda!
There was some more shuffling in the back, along with a few more pots clattering to the ground. Keith thought about how many they must have dropped from his intrusion alone. Out from the kitchen came the third sister, Brenda. Brenda was so tall she had to hunch down to get through the door. She was wide, too, wider than the other two put together and then some. She almost looked like she could be a normal human lady, except for the long chin and a nose so pointy it would make a toucan green with envy. "What's it this time?" she droned.
Why isn't the Orvietti order ready?
Loretta prompted. "I'm not in charge of that order. Greta is."
But you were supposed to make the frosting, Greta accused.
"I did make the frosting."
Then where's the cake? You're in charge of the cake, Greta,
Loretta screeched. "Then don't drag me into this," said Brenda. The three sisters' accusations devolved into a shouting match in mere moments. Poor Keith stood aside as shrilled shouting grew worse and worse until he thought his eardrums would rupture.
Shut up,
Loretta suddenly commanded.
Shut up, both of you. You're scaring the delivery boy. Everybody get back on track. We've got the frosting, so now we just need the cake?
Her sisters nodded fast.
Then what's stopping you from making it?
Greta palmed her forehead.
Oh, that's why. I was missing the last ingredient. Then go get it.
Loretta pointed a crooked finger at the front door.
Make haste, you old biddy. Don't call me old.
You're pretty old, Brenda mumbled.
You're older than me.
Not as old as her.
I aged like wine, thank you very much.
Salty wine.
Pig nose. Gator jaw.
Things were hastily deteriorating. Keith felt like he had to step in. Hey, he said. All three hags glowered at him, but he found his guts to keep talking. This delivery means a lot to me. I really need the money, so is there any way we can speed this up? Greta crossed her arms.
As soon as Brenda's done with the mixer, I'll get the batter started. In the meantime, we'll send Stefan to go grab the missing ingredient.
There was a moment of silence until a thump came from the kitchen. Brenda's eyebrows shot up.
Brenda?
Loretta chided.
Did you turn off the mixer before coming up front?
Sweat dripped from the largest sister's forehead. Yes. More thumps. Something snapped, an encroaching rhythmic tromping noise. Faster than Keith could make out, something with 4 legs burst from the kitchen door, wound around the corner, all 4 of them, and dashed out the front door, slamming it on the way out. Keith's pointed finger faltered. Was that...
Our mixer can get a little feisty, Loretta explained.
She sighed.
Well, that's gonna set things back on the order. We'll have to ask Mr. Orvietti to change the flavor or give us more time. But any way you look at it, they'll have to stall the wedding.
What? Keith was appalled. This job was important to him. You can't. You have to be able to do something about it. Greta shrugged, her back crackling like a tray of ice cubes.
We've got other orders to fill, boy. We are busy this season. And we've only got to Stefan to go grab the mixer for us. We still need the other ingredient.
What's that?
The largest toe of a 2-beaked bog heron, she said proudly.
Her sisters began smacking her, scolding her about keeping their recipe secrets. Keith nearly gagged. You put toes in cake batter?
It works wonders as a bonding agent.
Well, can I go get it for you? When the sister settled down, Brenda spoke up. Bog herons are nasty little things, young man. You'd do well to keep your career in low-level logistics. Keith was taken aback. Please, I need this gig. I'll do anything. All warmth left the room. Lights dimmed, and the pale green eyes of the hags lit up like lightning in a rainstorm. Shadows melded into their form, taking the air from Keith's lungs with them.
Careful how you phrase things, boy, Loretta spoke slowly. You might just get what you ask.
The next second, everything was back to the way it was. Warm, cheerful, and pink. Keith reeled back, gasping, clinging to the display counter for dear life. Greta scratched at her balding scalp.
It would be nice to get some more help around here, though. Indeed.
Loretta played around with some of the charms on her apron. Keith barely noticed that one of them looked suspiciously like a finger, one that twitched as she fiddled with it.
All right, young man. If you go get the toe, Stefan will get the mixer, and we can get back on schedule.
Keith felt relief wash over him. All right, where can I find this bog heron? Greta went into the back to work on other orders, while Loretta and Brenda gave him directions. They also handed him a small empty pouch, a pair of meat clippers, and a cluster of 6 long needles as thin as hair. What are these for? Keith asked. To give you a fighting chance, Brenda said. Put them under your nose when you meet the heron. It'll give you an edge.
Just make sure they take them off when you're done, Loretta warned. Or else you make a fine feline to greet guests.
She and her sister let loose a hysterical laugh. One similarly echoed from the kitchen.
Stay out of this, Greta! This is my cackle!
Ours, Brenda reminded her. Keith butted in before they could start arguing again. Last question. What happens if the heron doesn't have a biggest toe? Or it does, but I cut it off and therefore no longer its biggest toe? The hags gave him a confused look.
Easy, Loretta said. It's proportional with the toes it's got left, obviously. Now go, scurry along. If you still want to make the order in time, that is.
Yes, right away. The delivery man exited the bakery in time to see Stefan, the cookie dough golem, dash through the swamp in search of the runaway mixer. It wasn't until Keith was trudging through the bog water that he had second thoughts. What was he doing? Doing an odd job for hags. He was lucky enough to get out of there alive. He shouldn't be thinking about the Orvietti job. He should be running back to his car and never set foot in this part of the countryside again. But there were other factors forcing him through hazy trees and murky ponds. Like how he was going to pay for his kids' school supplies this fall. Or if he can get them anything for their birthdays. And now Mr. Orvietti would react to the setback. Someone in his profession is known to shoot the messenger, as they say. Keith drudged on, paying no mind to the soggy state of his feet. If the directions were correct, the bog heron would be nearby. A splash alerted him that he wasn't alone. Crouching behind a fallen tree, a hideous sight greeted him. Standing near as tall as a man, the bird looked hideously gorgeous. Frayed feathers glistened with a thin layer of slime. Long legs held up a finely shaped, if not gaunt, body adorned with 2 knife-shaped wings. At the very top sat 2 heads with long beaks and devilish eyes. One head in particular looked deceitful and murderous, while the other a more orderly sort of cunning, glaring into the dirty water formulating a plan. It lifted up a leg in preparation to strike. Keith tried to get the best view of its talons as he could. There were 3 left out of the 4 on its left foot. The sisters might have already gotten to this one. Without a sound, it lunged at the water, spreading its talons. There was one toe that looked like it could be the biggest, but he had to make sure. The heron struck the water with sudden ferocity. Must have missed, because both heads began to verbally proclaim their displeasure with deep-throated clicking. Unfurling its wings, it flapped a few times, lifting up its other leg. There, the one furthest from its body. Keith was not by any means an expert on birds, but that toe looked by far the biggest. Now to cut it off, he thought grimly. Easy. Slowly, he crept through the waters to place himself behind the heron. Both heads were hopelessly fixated on the water in front of them. Keith slipped out the meat clippers and gave them a test squeeze. Movement in front of Keith made him nearly jump out of his skin. A fish the size of his forearm darted in front of him, surfacing just enough to poke out its squishy, hideous face. Then, seeing the man in front of it, flailed and splashed before swimming away as quick as it could. In an instant, the heron's 2 heads whipped around, saw Keith with the clippers, and cried out in fury. With 2 flaps, it was airborne and on a collision course with the human. Keith barely dove out of the way, getting a mouthful of gunk as he splashed into the bog. He spit it out. Reeling, he nearly got pecked as the heron swung by again, but he managed to jump out of the way. Damned bird, it's fast. Wait, the needles. The second to last thing Keith wanted to do was to use anything given to him by hags to help him out. The very last thing he wanted was to be food for this thing. Begrudgingly, he took out the needles and lined them up to his face right under his nose. Immediately, they flew from his fingers, embedding themselves into his skin. He grunted as they dug in. They became softer and lax as they finished their odd sorcery. It was like getting a shot of adrenaline. Everything was sharper, clearer. The bog heron appeared to move with far less grace than before. Keith gripped the clippers tighter as he moved out of the way of another strike. This time he retaliated by punching the deranged head square in the beak. It screeched. Its twin head gave Keith a dirty look. Both of them started a strange dance. Keith was fast enough to dodge all of the heron's attacks, but he couldn't quite get a clear shot of its toes, which it kept behind it or under the water. It was a fan of flying by to attack Keith, so he formulated a plan. He taunted it, goading it into flying by a few times while positioning himself in a specific spot in front of a gnarled cluster of trees. He faked a trip up, hoping that the heron would take the bait. Thankfully, it did, and dove right for him, beaks wide open, crying anger. At the last second, Keith dove out of the way. The heron whooshed by, missing him entirely, and ramming right into the tree. Its heads let out a surprised squawk as they became entangled between the gaps in the logs. Despite its best efforts, the bird could not pry itself free of its new arboreal prison. Let's get this over with. Keith was gasping by the time he took hold of the heron's legs and hastily snipped off the biggest toe with only the smallest spurt of blood. The cry of pain both heads let out was terrible, shaking Keith right to his core. But the toe was his, which he safely tucked away in the pouch. Running away from the monster as fast as he could, Keith nearly forgot to take out the metallic whiskers on his upper lip. They didn't want to come off immediately, and at first he was worried that he'd been tricked. But with an abrupt tug, they came out one by one, painfully. He threw each one into the bog with a sneer, vowing never again to use anything having to do with hags. It was the onset of evening when Keith returned to the bakery. Stefan was playing in the mud and waved at him as he went inside. Loretta was at the front counter, reading a magazine titled Hex Monthly.
Welcome in, are we? Oh, delivery boy! Back so soon? How was the bog today? Pleasant?
Awful, Keith replied. He placed the clippers in the bag with the toe on the glass. One biggest toe of a 2-beak bog heron, as needed. Loretta smiled, giving him the shivers.
Marvelous! I'll fetch Greta right away. Why don't you take a seat and rest? It'll be just a bit before the cake is done.
Keith needed no one to tell him to rest. He flopped down on one of the oddly cushy lobby chairs with a sigh. He felt grimy, tired, and thoroughly beat. But at least he can complete the delivery. Now all he needed was a can of tuna fish and everything would be alright. Wait, where did that thought come from? Apparently, hag cake recipes are quick to bake, because it wasn't half an hour later when the 3 sisters came out of the kitchen with 3 large pink boxes, one for each tier of the cake. Each of one had a logo of the bakery on them with a handwritten message saying, "Congratulations on your big day. Here's to not getting cursed yet." As they handed off the boxes to Keith, Loretta placed a 4th, much smaller box on top. "What's this?" he asked.
A little something extra for being such a good delivery boy.
She pinched his cheeks. He really wanted to squirm away, but he couldn't risk dropping the cakes.
You didn't do too bad, dearie. If you're ever in need of work, stop on by. We're always on the lookout for an extra set of hands. A handsome set of eyes, too.
Greta flared her eyelashes at Keith.
Stop flirting with the delivery man,
Loretta hollered, which began yet another shouting match. Keith, being the reasonable man he is, left as fast as he could while they were distracted with each other. He ran at a pace where he could make sure the cake boxes weren't going to topple over all the way back to his truck. He only stopped the rest once he was back in the driver's seat. The engine was on, and he was speeding down the dirt road, heading back toward the city. Once his heart rate settled down, he gave a sideways glance at the small box sitting on the passenger seat. Morbidly curious, he cracked it open and peered at its contents. There were 3 cupcakes of different flavors. If he had to make a guess, he'd say they were chocolate, lemon, and cherry. His heart skipped a beat. He swore as he nearly turned his truck into the ditch, barely swerving it back onto the road. There were 2 cards in the box as well. One was a coupon for buy one get one free. The other had their contact info in a single line of writing. "We'll be waiting to give you your next job." Keith shuddered. He wasn't even sure he would give the cakes to his kids. Perhaps they were cursed somehow or poisoned. But they honestly seemed nice enough. And they could have turned Keith into a toad or something at any point he was there. "I wonder if they pay well," he mumbled to himself. The rest of the car ride home he spent in silence, weighing the pros and cons of working for the 3 sisters.